Hi everyone, and welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Youth Care podcast, brought to you by Corporate Zambia with support from AIDS Funds. Now, in this podcast, we aim to talk about topics that address young people's health and their well-being. Now, I am joined by a lovely set of people here. I'm with Albert, my co-host, and my lovely guest, who I'm going to allow to give a brief introduction of herself under 30 seconds.
Okay.
Go.
30 seconds.
Yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Annie Kapolio, and I'm a public health nurse by profession, but I'm also an enthusiastic young woman who's passionate about sexual reproductive health and women in leadership roles and so many other things. I'm a youth advocate, and I'm also enthusiastic about tobacco control and substance abuse control.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
That's a very big CV, I must say.
Yep.
Quite heavy.
So now remember, the Youth Care podcast is fun and interactive. And now, in a bit to know our guest a bit better, we're going to play a little game, just a short game. So what's going to happen here is that I've got a deck of cards here for her, right? And so depending on the card that you pick, I'm going to ask you a question. So let's say you pick hearts. That means I'm going to ask you a self-care question. If you pick diamonds, I'm going to ask you a self-achievement question. Are we good to go?
Sounds simple enough.
Awesome. So go ahead and pick a card. Okay. Okay, so this is an achievement-related question.
Yeah.
So what's one thing you're proud of accomplishing this year?
Let me see. As a young person, if I'm being quite honest, surviving the year.
Most important.
Most importantly, surviving the year. But I think if I had to mention one thing, in November, I was privileged to attend the second African conference on tobacco control. It was in Accra, Ghana. And it was a great opportunity as a young person to just be able to see how young people all around the continent are battling substance abuse and specifically tobacco abuse.
Amazing. How was the culture shift?
Ghana is very humid. It's very humid, it's very hot. I thought Zambia was hot. But in the experience in general, it's just seeing that the struggle is not a Zambian thing, because we often feel like, oh, in Zambia things are really bad. It's a continental thing, but also to see that young people are achieving it and achieving it at great levels, and so we can do that as well.
Okay, great.
Sorry, driving back to the topic of discussion today, we'll be talking about mental health. Mental health has been the talk of the day because it's practically what everybody as a human being you get to experience. Now we want to understand what mental health is, how the coping mechanisms in place that a person can use to be mentally healthy, mentally stable and everything. So we've got Annie who's going to help us digest the entire topic of mental health. So just to drive deep into the conversation, we'll start by defining what mental health is. How can you define mental health?
Okay, so in my own words, I would say mental health is the optimal, and I mean the highest point of someone's social being, emotional being, and psychological being. And it's not merely the absence of mental illness. So it's just making sure that everyone is operating at their optimal point, socially, emotionally, and psychologically. I think that's how easiest I can describe it.
Okay, what could you say are some of the challenges young people face from your experience as a young person, and also with your experience as you've been working? What do you think are the common challenges young people face around mental health?
I think the biggest challenge that I have identified and experienced is obviously stigma.
Okay.
Because I feel that stigma, it blocks everything. It blocks you from actually feeling what you're feeling, which is the first step to getting help. It blocks you from then getting the help. It blocks you from accepting the help. I feel that it's stigma, and of course we can't talk about mental health without talking about peer pressure, which is something that we've heard continuously, but we haven't really digested as a society, because it's happening over and over again. And now, of course, with with the new age, stigma doesn't really look like the peer pressure that we used to see, or peer pressure doesn't really look like the way we used to see it amongst friend groups. It's even self-inflicted through social media and things like that. So between stigma and peer pressure and just the sheer lack of services in Zambia, the sheer lack of healthcare services when it comes to mental health in Zambia is, I think, some of the biggest barriers.
Okay.
All right, so what do you think is the importance of placing reliance or emphasis on mental health as a young person?
Okay, so I feel that it's very important to place emphasis on mental health because essentially it controls everything. It controls the decisions that you make. It controls the interactions that you have with people, the relationships that you choose, and everything else. And to think that your mental health also affects your physical health in that respect means that if your mental health is suffering, everything else suffers. Because as human beings, we are social beings. So if you are depressed or you are anxious, it means all the aspects of your life are heavily affected.
Okay, but earlier you talked about stigma. What stigma is there exactly around mental health?
Okay, so I feel like when it comes to stigma, it is the people think that mental health is mutually exclusive with normalcy. If you're struggling with mental health, you are not normal. And as human beings, we try to achieve normalcy, right? We want to fit in, we want to feel included. So, and especially for young and developing people, because as themselves, they are just learning themselves. They're trying to fit into the world.
Yeah.
Now imagine trying to fit in and then you're like, oh, I know you're all circles, but I'm square and I want to fit in. So most young people try to morph themselves to fit in. And when it comes to stigma, it's heavily influenced by the lack of information. What is depression? What is anxiety? Is this person functional? Can this person operate? So I feel like the biggest misconception and stigma about mental health is that if you're struggling with mental health, then you're not normal, or then you can't be functional as a human being.
So wait, before we move from stigma, do you think culture plays a role in promoting stigma? Because if you look at the African state setup we're in, because Zambia, we do have our social norms and our cultural norms. Do those norms play a role in promoting stigma?
Okay, thank you so much for bringing that up. It definitely does. If we look at our background or we look at years back when mental health wasn't really an issue, you find that mostly people that seemed to be out of the norm or had mental health issues that we now understand at this time were excluded, they were exiled, and so they were shunned against. And I think that's where the stigma comes from. And you know how the leadership structure was back then. You couldn't even take a leadership role, or when there are negotiations, or when it's a festivity, they would be like, oh, don't let that person come. And if you look at how people with mental health issues, like psychosis, are treated in our culture, you find some on the streets, you find some that are not taken care of. And so then there's always been that bad picture and that stigma.
Okay, so are you able to differentiate between actually having a mental health issue and being stressed? Just being
Because
stressed.
these days we misuse the term mental health.
Yeah, when you're stressed, you're like, you know what, I have a mental health issue. I mean,
Okay, I feel like when it comes to that, you have to find a sort of a sweet spot. Because you have to be aware of yourself, right? I think one thing that's important for us to understand is that people have different thresholds. So something that can throw you over the edge, I might handle easily. And so then there's no comparison to say, well, she went through the same thing and she's thriving, why are you struggling? And so it's important, before I answer that question, for us to be able to validate everyone's feelings and also to help them navigate through the feelings. Because often we pose the risk to say, just one test and you think you're depressed. But that person could actually be depressed. And it's better for them to not be depressed and think it than them to be depressed and not think it. Yes. But when it comes to that, I think you bring up a very important topic. And I think where I like to draw the line, or where you could draw the line, is where you stop to function as you used to. Because the only bar is the one you set. So the things that you used to be able to do, now because of that issue, you can't do. You can't get out of bed, and you don't want to take a bath, and you don't want to eat. And the party you used to go to, you don't want to go to it anymore. Then maybe you might say, okay, I have crossed the line from just being sad to now being depressed.
All right, so the best thing you've mentioned is that it's different in individuals. What I can handle, another person cannot handle. So are there any common signs we might use to pinpoint, okay, I might have some mental health issues in terms of, let's say, stress, depression, and whatnot? Are there any common signs or just different go around?
Okay, I feel like there are general common signs medically or to the textbook. And of course, I think I earlier alluded to some of them. Seclusion, you don't want to, indulge or involve yourself in activities that you used to do. Low levels of energy, because again, mental health affects your physical health. So you have digestive issues, you have low energy levels, you have insomnia, so you're always tired, you're always fatigued. You can't function as you used to before, so you're having short attention spans, you can't study for a prolonged time, you can't really concentrate for a long time, and of course the obvious ones, the prolonged sadness. Like even when the thing that was making you sad has passed, even after you write the paper, even after you've resolved what was making you sad, you still feel that heavy feeling of sadness, then it might have, those are some of the common.
Alright, so just an addition, is there a specific, let's say, time range in which one might say, okay, I'm depressed, I'm stressed, because let's say, okay, another question on top of that, does sadness equal to depression? Because I've seen most people misuse the two, and is there a specific time frame one might say, okay, I think I've experienced this for the longest, maybe I might be depressed. Is there a time frame or?
You've asked 5 questions in one.
Okay, let me try to break it down. One, sadness is different from depression, but sadness can lead to depression. Being sad isn't being depressed, but if you're sad too often and sad for a long time, you might be depressed. And then when it comes to a time frame, there's really no time frame, right? Because some depression has acute onset. So you lose a loved one and you are fine, but now you've lost a loved one and you're sad. Or you've been struggling to find a job, so it's been 1 year and now you are sad. Okay. So it's just the triggers. Again, with mental health, it's triggers. And what you can handle, I can't handle. And some triggers are acute and some triggers are prolonged.
Okay, I'm just thinking about myself as an introvert and how I love to be in secluded places and how someone would think that I'm probably depressed, so I feel like for introverts, it's a bit difficult. I'm speaking on behalf of all introverts. It's a bit difficult for someone to identify whether this person is probably going through depression or maybe that's just them being themselves. Moving on to, how do you think young people can try to cope with these mental health challenges? What can we do? Okay, fine, I think I might have a mental health challenge, but what do I do now?
All right, okay, great. I think the most important thing is self-care before the mental health illness. I feel that as young people, we have the opportunity, we have the technology, we have the information. It's important for us to be proactive with our health than reactive. Like, take care of yourself, understand yourself, be self-aware, know what triggers you, and remove yourself from it. Of course, there are things in life that you can't avoid, but the things that you can at least try to. And when it comes to people with different personalities, again, the only normal that you're measuring your mental health to is your normal. So if you're an introvert and you like secluded places, that's what you like. And so that's you being well. Now imagine if you stopped enjoying being in those secluded places. Imagine if your sanctuary for peace becomes not peaceful for you anymore. Then you as your own self can be like, oh, maybe there's something wrong here because I really did enjoy being there.
Yeah, so are there any coping mechanisms apart from going to the clinic that one can use to handle their mental health?
All right, okay. As a health professional at heart, I feel the need to say going to the clinic should always be option number 1 because those are the best people to help you. Those are the licensed people to help you. But of course, it's not always accessible for everyone. But number 1 thing that you should do is, and I know this is hard, but talk to someone. At this point, talk to anyone, even ChatGPT.
Guilty,
but it gives good advice. Talk to anyone. You can write it down maybe if you feel safe on your notes app or in a notepad or in your diary. Talk to someone, vent. I've seen people actually write on a piece of paper and then bend the piece of paper. Find something that works for you. Meditate. If you're religious, pray. That can give you some peace. But I'd advise that you talk to someone and you try to see what's really wrong within yourself. And then maybe also definitely see a specialist.
Okay, I've got a bone to pick with ChatGPT because I asked it something and it told me that, you know what, I can only go this far. I'm not human, so Okay, moving on. What are some of the myths and misconceptions around issues to do with mental health, especially among young people, that you know of?
Okay, I think the biggest and the most dangerous myth and misconception when it comes to young people is that young people are attention seekers with mental health. Young people are attention seekers, and they are weak. We used to go through harder things, and we made it. No, I used to cross the river and fight a crocodile to make it to school, but I drop you off in a Hilux and you want to complain and things like that. And I feel like that's the biggest deterrent that we have with people not being able to take mental health seriously, because at the end of the day, as young people, we champion mental health. However, we look to other generations for resources and for support. And so it's hard, even as you advocate for mental health laws, as you advocate for mental health services, they're like, I think you can cope with that on your own. There are other people who have, let's say, maybe malaria, and those people need to be attended to. But we need to understand that this is a whole generation of people who are aware of their mental health. And so if it's not addressed, we'll have a next generation of young people who are more confused than the previous generation. Because unlike the previous generation that was unaware, imagine being aware and not getting the help, which is even more dangerous. So apart from the religious misconceptions and the traditional misconceptions and just the difference in generations, those misconceptions and the stigma, especially the lack of awareness, is very detrimental to the fight. But I think the number one thing is that young people are not being taken seriously, and that's a big issue. We see it in a lot of other sectors, but also heavily in mental health. And young people need to be heard. We're smarter than we seem.
That's not your answer. So basically, what I've gotten from your answer is that from an household level, they deem us as attention seekers from our guardians and whatnot because of the things they've passed through and they've survived it. They think we can actually survive, but times have changed. So how can we incorporate, like now, parents, guardians in this fight against having very balanced mental health?
Okay, great. I think when it comes to involving parents and other stakeholders that are older, we have to be very strategic about it. Because even though they say we survived, I'm sure when you interact with them, you're like, that sounds like post-traumatic stress. That sounds like anxiety. Yes, but then it's kind of hard for them to digest it. And you can't really go to your father and say, you have childhood trauma. You can't go to your father and say, well, you have childhood trauma.
Go for counseling.
Go for counseling. I feel that you need to somehow find a sweet spot in making them understand. Because imagine if it's hard for even some other young people to understand mental health. Because I've had conversation where someone says, I feel that mental health is a phantom and people make it up. Like everyone goes through things and everyone makes it through things. Now imagine these older people who weren't even given the platform to open up, even to their own parents. So you have to give them that grace as far as that goes, but also be able to explain to them. I find that when you explain to them, they, to an extent, I think understand. But also when it comes to parents, even in terms of advocacy and at a household level, you need to touch home. You need to make sure that you explain to them that this is the safety of your child. Times have changed. Your children are seeing different things on social media. And if you want your children to be safe and your children to navigate life, even away from your eye, this is what they need.
Okay. And I think another point that I've taken from what you've said is most of the time, parents want to compare their experiences with ours, but it's also happening amongst us. So I'll complain about something, but someone else will say, you know what, I'm having it even worse than you are. Or if it's me, and we have a tendency as Zambians, if I say I'm hungry, your friend will be like, oh, okay, but if it's me, and then exactly. So it's like it's a competition. It's like a competition to see who has a bigger mental health issue or who has a bigger problem, so to say. So yeah, that's a great point you've brought out. So
right now, I want to take it a bit personal with you. Have you ever experienced any mental health challenges? And if you have, how have you overcome them?
Okay, I think that one thing I'd like to say is, to answer the question, simple, yes. But also one thing that's important to note is that when it comes to mental health, it's not a one-stop center for wellness. You don't take the drugs and you feel fine all of a sudden. There are some chronic and prolonged mental health issues, and I myself struggle with anxiety. I'm often rushed in life, or I often feel anxious in situations that another person is just like, it's fine. But anxiety often attacks me, and I wouldn't say I've gone over it, but you just tend to learn yourself. And so if this makes me anxious, I'll just be a little bit early. And if this makes me anxious, I'll just take a little more time to get ready. And so you need to understand that you are not unwell. I think is the most important thing. There's nothing wrong with you. You're fine. And human beings are like jelly beans. Some are red and some are purple, but that's what makes the flavor all come together. And I started to appreciate myself the more people appreciated me. And I think that's one important thing about mental health and strengthening is that you also need systems around you. And as young people, we need to create that blanket for other young people. Because the more people would be like, oh, we like your vibe and we like your energy. And then I thought to myself, how can other people outside see me and appreciate me? But I'm so disappointed in myself. And so that helped me build my confidence.
Oh, but I think we're doing something right. She says she suffers from anxiety, but she seems so comfortable with us. That's what the Youth Care podcast does for you. All right, so even as we approach the end of this discussion, is there anything that you would like to emphasize or re-emphasize about mental health?
I think there's so much to be said about mental health, especially in our country and in our landscape, especially because we're dealing with so many things that people might deem to be more important. But mental health is just as important. And I think if I were to say anything to my peers out there, and even just to my younger self, is that at the end of the day, it's you and you. When you look in the mirror, it's you and you. And it's important for you to see yourself. And I know this sounds like, what do you mean see yourself? Self-awareness, I feel like, unlocks a lot of things for people. See yourself. It's important for you to just appreciate who you are. And it's okay. You can appreciate and work on yourself at the same time.
Okay.
And that's very much possible. I know that often young people struggle to perfection and then to put it out there. But no, it's fine to present a prototype to us. And then continue working on yourself. So in a nutshell, see yourself, be self-aware, and we love you. You're loved.
Oh, thank you. All right, so there you have it, everyone. We just had an insightful discussion with our special guest, Annie, and we dived into the issues around mental health around young people. And I was joined by my co-host, Albert. So from me, Priscilla Muziamba, it's until next time. Bye-bye.